Here's another one. This is in Leeds. Similar kind of principle, in fact. Leeds has got the city council owns actually the highest number of vacant council flats, of council houses anywhere in the country. They've got about 1,000. Ones like this, been empty about 20 years, no real prospect of the council bringing it back into use. But there's a few organisations in Leeds which actually can do something which the council can't. In a very similar way to Phoenix, what they've done is they've taken the principle a bit further. Here's some homeless people who have acted as volunteers to help get those properties back into use. But the difference is not only do those people gain the building skills that enable those properties to be brought back into use, one of them from each property actually becomes the tenant. And over time, after working in half a dozen or so houses, each of those people actually creates themselves a new home. And the effects of this are tremendous. I mean, I've been to see Canopy and Blatch, another organisation up there, a number of times. And every time I go there, there's some new surprise. There was one time when I went up there and met two people who were working together. One of whom was autistic and the other of whom was blind. Two people had actually been written off from employment all of their lives. And they found by working together, they each overcame each other's disabilities, and between them, their four hands are as good as anybody else's. And those guys have gone on to work on a number of houses and have found themselves work as well. And another tremendous thing which comes over. They've done 40 houses in a very small area of Leeds, which has actually transformed the area. 40 empty houses back into use actually makes a huge difference in a small area. Transforms the whole outlook of the area. And those people, if you work together on bringing a house into use, actually you form pretty close bonds. And those people who would never probably have had anything to do with each other before have actually formed close bonds and started to knit together a community which a few years ago looked like it was falling apart. And here's a group just after they've just finished one of their houses in the Hay Hills area of Leeds. Now here's an example from another part of the world. This is in the Netherlands, and Graham, one of our, I don't know whether he's here actually, one of our trustees, very kindly went over to the Netherlands to have a look at this, because I think this is fascinating. This is Spangen in Rotterdam, an area which has got a lot of the post-industrial problems that some of our cities have got. And this large block of properties was like a lot of the properties which are empty in this country. Emptied out over a number of years, and not a particularly strong housing market there, which meant the amount of investment which was needed to bring that property up to scratch just wasn't really financially viable. Effectively, the property was worth zero. And the really radical thing which happened there is, well, if it's worth zero, why not give it away? And that's what they did. Here you can see some people starting to have a look around the centre of the block. In fact, there's a quadrangle of flats, and this is the centre of that quadrangle. What they did is give away each of those 40 odd units in this block. But with a catch. Actually, what each person had to do was make a contribution towards the redevelopment costs, and it worked out about £50,000 each. What they could do is they could invest more if they wanted to, and get something pretty swanky. They could do some work on it themselves if they wanted. And some people spent many hundreds of thousands of pounds in creating some pretty startling designer flats. Other people did it themselves and stayed with the 50,000. This is actually the same quadrangle last spring, and I just sort of think, a garden says so much. There's a communal garden there which is used by all of the people, and I think, if that isn't an indication of a community, I don't know what is. Here's some of the flats which have actually been extended out. Some of the ones where more has been invested in. But a block which a few years ago was really a candidate for the bulldozer has turned into quite a remarkable new community which really works without, incidentally, any public subsidy. Now, if you think that could never happen here, let me tell you, it already has. This is Mr. Naeem, and he lives in Newcastle, and he's standing in front of his house. And I went actually see Mr. Naeem a few weeks ago. What he's holding is a 50p piece. He didn't actually get his property for free. He's actually exaggerating. He didn't get it for 50p. He got it for £1. It was two flats which were knocked into one. So perhaps we can forgive him his exaggeration saying it was 50p. The housing association who owned these properties before did something quite radical in selling them so cheaply. And I think to understand what they did and why it worked, I take myself back a few years to when I went to visit this part of Newcastle about 5 or 6 years ago. It's called Benwell, an area which has had some difficulties. When I went to Benwell about 5 or 6 years ago, high vacancy rate, an area which you could see was on the decline and on the turn, and most people who lived in that area were frankly looking for a way to leave. What the Housing Association did by selling properties as cheaply as this is they got people in with a different ethos. If you're going to buy a house, if you're going to do it up, if you're going to agree to stay there for 5 years, which is what Mr. Naeem and his neighbours did, you've got to have some hope value and some belief that the area is going to get better. And what seems to happen is when you've got enough people who think that, it becomes self-fulfilling. And visiting Hampstead Road, as this is, a few weeks ago, the area was different. It was very, very different. OK, it's still got some problems, and OK, there's lots of other things which have happened which have helped it. But the council, the housing association, the police are all very adamant that actually this was the turning point. This was the point at which the ethos of the area changed and which the area stopped going down and started coming up. Now, selling a few properties at discount price may seem like an expensive thing to do, but when you actually look at that kind of dividend, it starts to look like very, very good value indeed. Now, we started here. We started in this dark, gloomy place, which is Tancred Road in Liverpool, an area which, if anywhere, was going to be non-cost effective and not worth doing, and no demand for the properties was surely here. This is the same road today. Tancred Road was actually bought by a company called the Affordable Housing Development Company. Affordable has got maybe something of a caveat to it, but they did sell these properties at below market price. But they did this renovation without public subsidy. They did it by renovating these properties, not just to a standard which was habitable, but to a standard which actually changed the whole idea of demand for that area. So whilst there's lots of properties in Anfield, there are lots of available properties that nobody wants. There are very few which are in this condition, and suddenly actually there was a lot of demand for those properties. Tancred Road is now fully renovated and fully occupied. And it strikes me that if you can do something like that in Tancred Road, you can do it anywhere. And I think some of the remarkable people who I've met, and I've shown you some of their stories today, between them and between stories like this, I think there's a very, very good reason for thinking we really can get affordable housing from our 750,000 empty properties. Thank you very much.